Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited about today's webinar, which is about speaking a foreign language with confidence. It's a very interesting topic, and it's a question that a lot of us are asking ourselves. How do I get to the stage where I can speak a foreign language with confidence? And today I'm going to talk to you about some practical tips and some practical strategies that I have used to learn languages and to improve my confidence when speaking a foreign language. So confidence, I don't think confidence is necessarily related to fluency. I think it's something that you can develop regardless of your level. Of course, if you know more vocabulary and if you know more about how to express your thoughts using more kind of complex language, of course you become more fluent and more confident naturally. But I think confidence is also something that can be practiced, something that can be built, and you can do it even at the start of your language learning journey. So let's get this webinar started. Let me just share my screen with you. I've got a little presentation there. There we go. So, getting stuck. Getting stuck or not being able to explain what you mean is something a lot of language learners fear. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of us sometimes remain silent when we could actually get involved in a conversation and do what we need to do to get fluent, which is, to put it simply, practice, practice, and practice. I don't know about you, but I've experienced this situation many times before. Picture this. You're with a group of people and you're all having a good laugh, telling stories or debating a topic. You're really interested and actually you have a good story to contribute, but you hesitate and you think, I don't know whether I'll be able to explain everything I need to make this sound interesting. Do you know what I mean? And then, before you know it, the conversation has moved on to another topic and you've lost your chance. That's really frustrating too, isn't it? You've put this perfect story together in your head, and now it's wasted because those guys around you are already talking about something else. So, what can you do to build your confidence in this situation so that you can actually speak and so that you're not worried about what's going to happen once you've started speaking? So, for example, not being worried about getting stuck, and if you do get stuck, being able to move on without losing your confidence. And it's very easy to lose it. It's not. It's enough for somebody to make a gesture that you might interpret as negative, for example, or to yawn unintentionally, and that can sometimes distract you and get you stuck. So, I'm back here. So in today's webinar, I'm going to talk to you about how to speak with confidence. I'm going to discuss tips and ideas for what you can do to develop confidence, and on a more practical level, how to ensure that you can incorporate speaking into your daily language learning practice. I'm also going to talk to you about what to do if you're in the middle of a conversation and you get stuck. How do you move on from there? It can be quite intimidating and scary, but I can assure you, you can do it, and you can develop your ability to actually move on without losing your confidence. But first, I've got a favor to ask. I want to ask you to stick around until the very end of this webinar, because I've got a couple of exciting bonuses I want to share with you, and I'm going to tell you what they are at the end. So, do you think you can do that? I hope so. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the webinar now. Just going to share the screen with you again. There we go. And we're back to my slides. So the first tip I'm going to give you is I'm going to talk to you about learning to talk around a topic or an idea. Essentially, what it involves is using the words you already know to explain a concept which you can't explain by using one word in the language you're learning, simply because you don't know that word yet. So you don't know the exact definition or translation in your language, or in the language that you're learning. Not knowing a word or a language structure is something that very often holds us back. It's something that many of us fear, and when it does happen to us in the middle of saying something, we get a little bit discouraged and disappointed with ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Picture this. You're a student at a university and you study political science. English is your second language, but you don't know how to say political science in English, and you're trying to explain to your American friend what you study at university. You've started the conversation already, and you said that you live in Madrid and you go to university there. You really like the city and the weather. It's a lovely city, isn't it? And then your American friend asks you, but what do you actually study? What is it? What subject do you specialize in? And then there's silence, because you don't know how to say political science. Do you panic? I know I have done that in the past. But now, instead of panicking, I've got a different strategy for you, which is basically what I've mentioned at the start, talking around a topic. I use language that I do know to explain this concept. For example, I can say something like this. I study different ideologies and systems that relate to how countries are run and how people in power organize those countries. It's a bit like one of those games that people play sometimes when you have to describe an object or an idea without using that word, and the person who guesses what the word is gets a point. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm sure your American friend would then help you out once you've given this definition, and they would say, do you mean sociology? And you would probably then say, no, it's more to do with the people and parties who vote and pass laws based on what they believe a country should look like. Oh, you mean political science? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. So this technique is a whole mindset that you should develop. It's a whole new way of thinking. Instead of going into a conversation with fear, you should go into a conversation with hope that that the language you do already know will enable you to explain what you mean, even if you don't know the exact words. So you don't always have to know the exact words. I think that's the main message I'm trying to communicate here. And I think it's something that really holds some people back, the fact that they don't know the exact translation when they can hear their native language in their head, and they're kind of fearing that they won't be able to express themselves as well as they do in their native language. So they can feel some fear, and they can be quite intimidated by this. But what I'm saying here is that you should have hope, and you should get rid of the fear and try to use the language that you already know to explain what you're trying to explain. Does that make sense? I hope so. And this whole idea of talking around a topic, it reminds me of this idea I've read a lot about recently, called an abundance mindset. An abundance mindset is basically the opposite of a scarcity mindset. Are you confused? Let me explain. Imagine this. We're on a desert island, you and I, and we only have enough food for one dinner. 1 apple and 1 sandwich. So it's a couple of maybe leftover sandwiches that we saved from the sinking ship we were both on. And if we have a scarcity mindset, we think the sandwiches or the sandwich and the apple are the only food there is. We feel that we'll need to fight for it, and once they're gone, we're going to starve. That sounds scary, doesn't it? There's the whole island to explore, though, and maybe there's a community that lives on the other side of it. You know, there may be some more sandwiches and a kitchen where you can actually cook food. There might be some berries in the forest and some birds that lay eggs. You never know. There are lots of possibilities out there. And that's exactly what the abundance mindset is all about. It's about learning to spot opportunities where you think there are none. It's about thinking outside the box and not getting too worried about the things you don't have, because it doesn't always have to be that way. You never know what's around the corner. It might be a bakery full of sandwiches, for example. So when applied to language learning, the abundance mindset is all about noticing and celebrating the things you do have and do know, instead of just focusing on the things you don't have or don't know. So it's this kind of idea that there are some opportunities out there. Maybe you're not noticing them now. Maybe you don't know exactly, how to say a sentence exactly in the way you'd wanted to say in your native language. But there might be other options. There might be other ways in which you can express the same idea, maybe using simpler vocabulary, but you will manage to get the message across equally well. So next time you're explaining something to somebody, I would encourage you to switch to an abundance mindset. Try to remember this idea and make the most of the words you do already know. So going back to the technique of talking around a word or an idea, using this technique is not just a lifesaver when you're in the middle of a conversation. It's also a great way to practice your speaking skills whenever. I personally use it every time I learn vocabulary. So if I'm learning a word, I'm just going to give you an example now. So for example, if you're learning English and you're trying to figure out what the word wireless means, once you've figured that out, you want to look at it and explain it in your own words. So this is the practice element. So imagine you're talking to somebody that doesn't know the word. This is how I practice vocabulary. I take a word, I know what it means, and now I'm trying to explain it to somebody who doesn't know this word. So if I say to them wireless, they will say, "What do you mean? I don't understand." So you're trying to explain what wireless is without using the word wireless. So you're talking around it. So what's wireless? It's a quality of an electronic device that's connected to another electronic device without using a cable. It relies on waves. It's something you use to connect your computer to the internet. Have you guessed by now? Probably. So by doing this activity, not only do you practice your ability to talk around words in case you're stuck in a conversation, but you also use new vocabulary in practice, and you practice your general speaking and pronunciation skills. So it's all in one. I really recommend this as something you can do daily, and I'm sure you will be able to see results after just a few weeks of using this technique. Right, let me just come back to the screen. Are you still there? I hope so. So the main two lessons that we've covered so far are practice talking around a topic if you don't know the exact word or the exact definition. Use this technique whenever you're learning new vocabulary to make sure that you incorporate speaking into your daily practice. And switch to an abundance mindset to make the most of what you already do know how to say and the words that you already know. Now it's time to move on to the next tip. And this one is about one of the blockers that often prevent language learners from speaking with confidence. And it relates specifically to vocabulary. What I mean is not just not knowing vocabulary, but not being able to use it. Have you ever experienced the following? You're reading a book in your target language and you can understand most of it. You can understand a lot of the words. You can understand many of the idiomatic expressions used in it. It's all great and you're really proud of yourself that all of these words seem so familiar to you. So you can understand everything and everything is going brilliantly. And then your language partner calls you up and they ask you about this book that you're reading. They say, "Hey, tell me more about this book. What's the story?" And then you start telling them, but suddenly you become a little bit stuck. You can explain the story to your friend, but you're using quite simple language. Suddenly, you can't remember all of the beautiful words and idiomatic expressions that were used in the book. How is that possible, you might think? I understood everything and I know these words, but I just can't use them now. Have you ever experienced this kind of thing before? I certainly have. It can be really frustrating. So now I'm going to talk to you about a technique I've used to help me remember the words that I learn so that I don't just recognize them when I read them or when I hear them, but that I can actually use them in a conversation as well. So this technique is all about learning vocabulary in context. You may have seen my recent webinar on learning vocabulary effectively, and if you have, then you'll be familiar with the concept already. I'm just going to briefly summarize it now and explain how it applies to speaking, so I hope you will learn something new here. Let's look at the following example. A new person starts working in your office. Once you've seen her a couple of times, you probably remember her face in conjunction with her work uniform, the way she styles her hair, the office setting, and so on. But if you saw her somewhere else, for example, somewhere in the street or outside the office, when she's wearing completely different clothes and her hair is styled in a completely different way, would you recognize her? If she's new and you've only seen her in the office a couple of times, you may not recognize her in this new setting. It's because your brain registered her face in conjunction with her surroundings at work. In other words, in conjunction with the context. So, if you want to be able to recall vocabulary when you speak, to make sure you don't get stuck, you need to make sure you learn it in context too. Words are closely associated with other words. Even when you look at the phrase I've just used, closely associated with, it's a phrase that's made up of three words that work together as a phrase. It's called a collocation, so a group of words which always go together and they sound natural when you use them. So one thing you can do when learning new words or phrases that you like so much that you would like to use them yourself in a conversation is learning whole sentences. Don't worry, you don't need to memorize whole sentences. Just make sure that whenever you're learning a new word or a new phrase, you're looking at an example of a sentence that uses it too. So not just memorizing lists of words or individual words, but memorizing them in context, seeing how they work in context, seeing how they work in sentences. So what you should do, I think, is practice saying the sentence out loud every time too, because that helps you remember things better. So look at a sentence and say it out loud, and the best thing you can do is come up with your own sentence that uses that structure or that vocabulary in it. Another thing you can do is you can highlight or write down sentences or phrases that you like the sound of when you read. So writing something by hand is something that many language learners find helps them memorize new language more easily. I personally really like doing this, and I've heard a lot of language learners find it helpful. Rather than just typing on your computer, just writing something by hand, because it kind of, I think it cements the vocabulary and the new language in your head better than typing it out on the computer. So, are you ready to move on to the next technique? I am. So, this new technique is about using stock phrases. It's a technique I've used for all of the different languages I've attempted to learn, and it simply involves recording and memorizing stock phrases as you learn your target language. First, let me explain what I actually mean by stock phrases. So stock phrases are essentially words, expressions, or full sentences that you can use in very specific situations. For example, when you're starting a conversation, when you're ending a conversation, when you'd like to introduce an additional point into a conversation, when you'd like to express your disappointment with something, or when you'd like to say you're interested in something somebody else is saying, and so on and so on. There are lots of examples out there. So if you memorize examples of sentences that you can use in different types of situations, such as the ones I've just mentioned, you will feel more confident whenever you're stuck in a conversation. And here's why. Using a stock phrase when you're stuck will actually boost your confidence by putting the wheels of conversation into motion. Sometimes all you need to get over being stuck is to say something, anything. I know this may not sound like the most useful piece of advice, but believe me, saying anything will put the wheels into motion. It will help you feel that you do actually know how to say something in your target language. Saying a phrase you just memorized in advance will help you sound fluent, and that feeling will strengthen your confidence as well. We all feel shy sometimes, but once we say one thing, it's much easier to move on to the next step, believe me. So this is where the stock phrases template comes into play. This is the free bonus that I promised at the start of this webinar. I will email it to you after the webinar ends, but in the meantime, here's a little screenshot of what it looks like. It's essentially a template that you can use to record different types of stock phrases. So the template is divided into a number of columns, and each of them corresponds to a different situation. For example, there's a column for recording phrases that will help you introduce a list of points into your conversation, or phrases that will help you compare and contrast 2 points. So, I'm coming back now. So, to sum up, here are the most important points that I've covered today in this webinar on how to speak with confidence. Talk around a word or a phrase if you don't know the exact translation. Adopt an abundance mindset and really celebrate what you already know and what you know how to say. Learn vocabulary in context to make sure that you can use it in practice and to recognize when somebody else uses it. And record and memorize stock phrases that will help your confidence when you're stuck in a conversation and you don't know how to move forward. So I'm absolutely confident that you too can become a confident foreign language speaker. And you may not always notice your results very quickly, but these things take time. And step by step, hopefully, with using the techniques that we've just discussed, hopefully you will be able to see some results. And I think as with anything, it takes time, it takes a little bit of commitment and motivation, but then it does pay off at the end. And I'm sure you will be able to see the results if you practice consistently. I think you can build your confidence just by believing that you can do it. But as a general rule, the more you speak and the more you listen, the better you get, the more fluent you get, and the more confident you get when you speak a foreign language. So, one final thing that I want to encourage you to do is to follow 5-Minute Language on Facebook. So I frequently post lots of advice on learning languages there, so it can be a really nice way for you to access tips and resources that you can use in your day-to-day language practice. So I really encourage you to go to my Facebook page, just search 5-Minute Language, and you will be able to find it very easily and hit like, and I will be delighted to have you there and to be able to provide lots of cool tips on learning languages. So this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I am really looking forward to seeing you again for more seminars of this type. If you follow 5-Minute Language, I'm sure you will be able to. You will see some of the posts I will be posting about upcoming webinars. So make sure you stay tuned, and I hope you will be able to see the results that you want in the languages that you're learning. So I'll see you soon for another webinar, and thank you for watching, and good luck.